When you finally say no, they call you cold. When you choose peace over pleasing, they say you've changed. But what if Carl Jung was right? What if being called difficult is the first sign you're becoming free? They won't tell you this, but the moment you begin to set boundaries, you disrupt the system. Not just any system, but the silent, invisible one that's been feeding off your compliance, your guilt, your silence. And suddenly, the mask you've worn for years begins to crack. Carl Jung didn't write about boundaries in the way self-help books do. He went deeper. He saw boundaries not as fences to keep others out, but as thresholds to invite your true self in. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But the price of that privilege? Being misunderstood, being called names, being labeled selfish, rude, arrogant. Why? Because when you stop being what others need you to be, they panic. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that served their comfort. The version who over-explained, who over-apologized, who said yes with a smile while screaming no on the inside. But when you stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer a band-aid, you threaten their illusion of control. This is what Jung meant when he warned that whatever you do not bring to consciousness will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If you don't know why you've tolerated mistreatment, if you don't know why you shrink when you should speak, it's not your fault. It's your unconscious programming at work. You were taught subtly or directly that love must be earned, that to be good is to be agreeable, that your needs make you too much, and so you became less expressive, less honest, less you, until the day you couldn't anymore. Setting boundaries isn't rebellion, it's resurrection. It's the moment you return to yourself after years of abandonment. It's the moment you look in the mirror and say, "I matter too," but that moment doesn't come without backlash. People will test you, push back, guilt trip you. Some will leave, some will twist your growth into betrayal. And it will hurt. Because for the first time, you're not just losing people, you're shedding. Identities: the caregiver, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who always made it easy for everyone else at the cost of your own breath. But here's what Jung knew. The path to wholeness is through individuation, the process of separating from the collective expectations and becoming uniquely yourself. And boundaries are sacred tools in that process. They are the lines that protect your energy, your time, your mental health. And yet, so many still confuse boundaries with walls. They say you've hardened. They say you've changed. And you have. You've changed from a version of yourself, built on survival, into one grounded in truth. And truth, by nature, disrupts. So, when they say you're difficult, smile. It means the spell is breaking. Because being difficult in a sick system is a sign of health. Because being too much in a world that benefits from your silence is a badge of awakening. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And when you set boundaries, you force them to face themselves. Their entitlement, their projections, their discomfort with your growth. And most won't like it. But here's the paradox. The more you honor your truth, the less you need validation. The more you protect your peace, the less chaotic your world becomes. And the more you let people be wrong about you, the more power you reclaim. That's the evolution Jung spoke of, not into perfection, but into authenticity. It's not that setting boundaries makes you difficult. It's that it makes you different. Different from who you used to be. Different from who they expect you to be. Different from the one who tolerated too much, too long. And that difference is the beginning of freedom. Freedom from over-explaining. Freedom from guilt. Freedom from relationships that only functioned when you were small. Yes, it will be lonely at first. There will be quiet, echoes of doubt, nights where you question yourself. That's natural. It's detox. It's the silence between who you were and who you're becoming. But wait, because on the other side of that silence is something sacred. peace that doesn't come from others liking you, but from you loving you, a power that doesn't shout, but simply is, and a knowing, deep and still, that you are no longer available for anything that costs your soul. Jung would call that integration. The moment your shadow and self meet, and instead of battling for control, they become allies, no longer split between who you are and who you pretend to be, but unified. And that unity, that's the end of self-betrayal. So the next time someone calls you difficult, don't argue, don't defend, don't shrink. Smile, because you've just become something they can no longer manipulate. A person with boundaries, a soul with fire, a spirit with edges, and in a world addicted to control, your freedom is always going to feel like defiance. But Jung knew this too. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And yet it's also the most liberating. You're not too much. You're finally enough for yourself. And they don't have to understand your boundaries. They only have to respect them. There's a strange thing that happens when you start honoring your boundaries. You begin to see the truth in others. Not their words, not their performance, but their patterns. Who checks in without needing something? Who respects your no without resentment? Who celebrates your growth instead of being threatened by it? And that truth. It's not always beautiful. It's not always what you hoped for. But it is liberating, because Carl Jung understood something we often forget in our rush to be liked. Real relationships don't crumble when you set a boundary. Fake ones do. Conditional ones do. Manipulative ones do. And that's a gift. A painful gift, yes, but a gift that clears your path. So don't mourn the people who walk away when you stop breaking yourself to keep them whole. Mourn the years you spent convincing yourself that their love was real. Boundaries are a filter. They separate those who love your light from those who feed on your energy. And you'll be shocked by how many people were only drawn to your open gates, not your soul. They weren't in love with you. They were in love with your accessibility, your availability, your silence, your willingness to bend. And the second you stop bending, their version of love turns cold. But this is where your power begins. Because when you no longer hand out pieces of yourself just to be accepted, you start choosing yourself. And that's where the self finally begins to form, not as a reaction to others, but as a creation of your own inner truth. Jung warned us that we all carry a shadow, the parts we hide, deny, and repress. But setting boundaries brings the shadow out in others. When you say, "This is my line," you trigger everything they haven't dealt with in themselves. Their abandonment wounds, their need for control, their buried rage. That's why they lash out. Not because you did something wrong, but because they're being asked, finally, to confront their own lack of boundaries, their own lack of respect, their own inner child that learned to scream when the world said no. This is why Jung's work remains so powerful. It doesn't just explain human behavior. It explains why growth hurts, why clarity costs, why the moment you wake up, you start to lose what was never meant for you. Because most people don't want your truth. They want your compliance. They want the version of you that doesn't make them uncomfortable, that doesn't shine too brightly, that doesn't say, "I deserve better," and when you change the script, they call you the villain. But here's what Jung would ask you. Why are you afraid to be the villain in someone else's story if it means you finally become the hero in your own? You are not born to be agreeable. You were not born to walk on eggshells. You were not born to explain your soul to those committed to misunderstanding it. You were born to rise. And sometimes rising looks like distance, like silence, like walking away, like burning bridges that only ever led you to versions of yourself you no longer recognize. The world will tell you that's selfish. But Jung would tell you it's necessary, because the alternative, living your whole life in fragments, always shape-shifting, always wondering why you feel empty around people who smile at you but don't see you, why your energy is gone after every interaction, why your soul is screaming in rooms filled with noise. Setting boundaries is how you answer that scream. It's how you reclaim your life. not in anger, but in awareness. And yes, people will project. They'll say you're cold, difficult, harsh, dramatic. But don't confuse their discomfort with your wrongness. Don't let their inability to meet you at your new standard convince you to lower it. This isn't about cutting people off with pride. It's about protecting your peace with grace. Carl Jung believed that to become whole, you must integrate all parts of yourself: the light, the shadow, the rage, the sorrow, the boundaries, the truth. And when you do that, you become unshakable, not because life gets easier, but because you stop betraying yourself to survive it. The people who love you will adjust. The ones who can't were never truly with you. They were with the version of you that said yes when you meant no. The one who smiled when you wanted to cry, the one who kept peace externally while you were at war within. But that person? You're letting them rest. You're not killing your old self, you're releasing her. With love, with thanks, with the understanding that she did what she had to do to survive. But now you're ready to live. Boundaries are not a sign that you're hard. They're a sign that you're healing, that you're learning to value your time, your energy, your voice, that you no longer see love as something to earn, but something to share, mutually, equally, respectfully. Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." And this moment of choosing yourself, it is integration. So when they say you've changed, don't flinch, say, "Yes, I've changed." Because the truth is, you were never meant to stay hidden. Never meant to say yes when your soul said no. Never meant to feel guilty for honoring your truth. This is your emergence. This is your rise. And no one who truly loves you will fear your freedom. What they call difficult, Carl Jung might have called awakened. Because once you awaken to your worth, you cannot unsee it. You cannot shrink for comfort. You cannot unknow the price of peace, and people don't always take kindly to that, because your boundaries don't just shift your life, they unsettle theirs. Suddenly they can't control the narrative. They can't guilt you into staying. They can't count on your silence, your overextension, your habit of self-abandonment, and that terrifies them. Jung taught that the world within is often projected onto the world without. So when someone attacks your boundaries, they're not really angry with you. They're confronting a part of themselves they've avoided for years. The part that still relies on manipulation instead of maturity, control instead of connection. So, what do? They shame you. They gaslight you. They label your growth as arrogance, your clarity as cruelty, your strength as stubbornness. But here's the truth. If someone loses access to you when you set a boundary, they never respected you to begin with. They only respected what you gave them. Your time, your kindness, your energy, your sacrifice. You weren't loved. You were used. And now, you're reclaiming what was always yours. This is the sacred fire of individuation, the psychological process Jung spoke about, where the true self is born from the ashes of false roles. The caretaker, the pleaser, the fixer, the one who holds everything together. That version of you was noble, but it was never whole. Now you're stepping into something deeper. You're no longer begging to be seen. You're seeing yourself. You're no longer chasing love. You're becoming it, and in doing so, you begin to disturb everything built on your silence. They want the old you back, the soft-spoken one, the over-apologetic one, the one who said, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. But that version of you, she's gone. She left when you stopped trading your truth for acceptance. When you realized that love without respect is not love. It's dependency dressed as devotion. And it's not your job to explain your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. Jung would remind you, true transformation is misunderstood by the very people who never expected you to grow. So let them misunderstand. Let them call you names. Let them gossip. Let them say you're too much or too distant, or too strong. Because what they're really saying is, you're no longer controllable, and that scares me. That is not your burden to carry. Boundaries are not walls, they're bridges to a deeper you. A you that doesn't just survive relationships, but thrives in ones built on mutuality. And here's the paradox Jung would smile at. When you truly honor yourself, you attract people who do the same. No more emotional beggars, no more energy leeches, no more pseudo-friends who disappear the second you have needs of your own. You start meeting people who are whole, people who don't just tolerate your boundaries, they thank you for them, because they too have done the work. They too have walked through the fire of self-forgiveness and personal evolution. They don't love you for what you give. They love you for who you are. That's the reward on the other side of the storm. But you don't get there by staying silent. You get there by becoming the mountain, not the leaf. Still, grounded, unshaken by the winds of opinion, and that takes strength. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength, but the quiet, revolutionary kind. The strength to be disliked by the wrong people so you can be deeply seen by the right ones. Jung warned that we often mistake personality for essence, that we cling to who we were taught to be instead of discovering who we are. And the journey to that truth? It begins with a no. A sacred no. A divine no that echoes through your spirit like a thunderclap. No more. No more pleasing at the expense of peace. No more performing to keep people comfortable. No more shrinking to be digestible. You were never meant to be small. You were meant to be honest, unapologetic, radiant, and yes, difficult in a world that profits off your silence. So if they say you've changed, say thank you. If they say you're hard to love, say good, then only the softest souls will reach me. If they say you're not who you used to be, say, exactly. I've come home to myself. This is the soul's return. Carl Jung knew this. He knew that setting boundaries was not about protecting your ego, it was about protecting your essence, the part of you that is real, sacred, eternal. Not who others need you to be, but who you truly are when the masks fall. So set the boundary. Speak the truth. Walk away when respect leaves the room. Because you're not here to make people comfortable. You're here to be free. When you finally learn how to protect your peace, people start calling it attitude, but they never call it what it really is, healing. Because healing looks like distance. Healing looks like not responding. Healing looks like walking away when everything in you used to stay and tolerate. Carl Jung believed that every step toward consciousness begins with discomfort. And nothing is more uncomfortable than unlearning the ways you've betrayed yourself just to belong, the lies you've told to be accepted, the roles you've played to avoid rejection. You see, the moment you say, "I'm not doing this anymore," the world pushes back, not because you're wrong, but because you've broken the unspoken contract, the contract where you dim your light so others can shine, the contract where you suppress your needs so they don't feel guilty, the contract where you abandon your boundaries to make others feel safe. But here's the truth. Any relationship that survives only through your self-abandonment is not a relationship, it's a transaction. And you were never born to be a bargain. You were born to be a revelation. So when they say you're too cold now, they mean they can't manipulate you with the same tricks. When they say you're not the same, they mean you've stopped being easy to use. When they say you're so distant, they mean your silence is louder than their guilt. Let them talk. Let them create their story, because you are no longer in the business of editing yourself to keep people from feeling uncomfortable. That is not love. That is survival. And you are done surviving at the expense of your soul. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And when you evolve, you become a mirror to those still hiding, a reflection too raw for their comfort. So they project, they deflect, they blame, because your growth reminds them that theirs is still waiting. And your boundary, it's a line in the sand that says, I'm no longer participating in my own exploitation. They'll say you've become selfish. But selfishness is not what they're afraid of. They're afraid of you no longer needing them, needing their approval, needing their validation, needing their chaos to feel alive. And the moment you stop needing that, they lose their power. That's when the attacks come. Passive aggression, guilt trips, silent treatment. But now you see clearly, those aren't punishments. They are patterns. Patterns that kept you small. Patterns that kept you entangled in emotional contracts that only benefited them. Not anymore. You have returned to yourself. And when you return to yourself, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop explaining your no. You stop justifying your limits. Because you understand, your peace is not up for discussion. Jung would say this is the shadow work few dare to do. Confronting the inner compulsion to please, the fear of being alone, the ache of being misunderstood. But the reward? It's sovereignty. You begin to feel what real alignment tastes like. Not the high of approval, but the calm of authenticity. Not the drama of connection, but the stillness of clarity. You stop seeking intensity, and you start choosing peace. And with that peace comes a quiet revolution. You start loving differently. You stop chasing people who never saw you. You stop texting people who made you doubt your voice. You stop apologizing for breathing too loudly in spaces that never deserved you. And it's not bitterness, it's wisdom. Because love without boundaries is not love. It's codependency. And relationships without mutual respect are not intimacy. They're entrapments. So when they call you difficult, wear it like armor. Because difficult is the word people use when they can't control your yes anymore. Difficult is the name they give you when your no threatens their entitlement. Difficult is what they label anyone who stops playing a rigged game, but Carl Jung would say, those who do not conform are often the ones who transform. You, chosen one, are transforming, and that threatens everything built on your submission. Let it crumble, because in its place will rise something they never expected, a version of you who no longer needs to be chosen, because you've chosen yourself. This is not the end of your story. It's the birth of it. You've stepped out of the role they wrote for you, and you've picked up the pen. You are no longer a character in their narrative. You are the author of your own. And with each sentence, each boundary, each breath, you write a story that honors your truth. They can't read it. They don't understand it. They will judge it, but that's okay. It was never written for them. You were not born to be digestible. You were not created to be everyone's favorite flavor. And the moment you stop shrinking, stop twisting yourself into something that makes others feel safe, you become powerful beyond belief. But with that power comes a price. You lose the version of you that lived for their comfort. Carl Jung warned us, transformation is not light and rainbows. It's fire. It burns away the illusions, the false identities, the masks we wear to keep the peace while we suffer in silence. When you set boundaries, you will be misunderstood. When you speak your truth, you will be resisted. When you honor yourself, you will be called selfish, and that is where most people turn back. But not you, because you've learned. Your silence was never love, it was fear. Your compliance was never peace, it was survival. Your overgiving was never generosity. It was a desperate attempt to be seen. Now you're done with all of it. Now you understand what Jung meant when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You've woken up. You see the roles they placed you in, the fixer, the forgiver, the quiet one, the peacemaker, not as virtues, but cages. And now that you've started breaking free, the backlash is loud. Why? Because you stopped carrying what was never yours. You stopped being their emotional trash bin. You stopped absorbing blame just to keep the harmony. You stopped rescuing people who refuse to rescue themselves, and that's what makes you difficult. Difficult to fool, difficult to manipulate, difficult to exploit. But isn't that the point? You are not here to be easy to use. You're here to be real, to be whole, to be holy. Yes, holy. Because every boundary is sacred, every no you declare is a prayer for your own soul. Every distance you create is a temple where you can finally breathe. They don't have to like it. They don't have to understand it. They just have to live with it, because now you're not asking permission. You're not explaining why you need space. You're not justifying why you no longer answer every call. You're not apologizing for removing yourself from the circus. You are no longer performing. You've exited the stage. And Jung would say, that's when you truly begin to live. Because real life isn't found in people-pleasing. It's found in soul-pleasing. It's found in integrity, in alignment, in the stillness of knowing you are finally choosing you. You walk differently now. You speak with less urgency. You listen more, and you react less. Because the storm that used to rage inside you has quieted. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. You don't need to defend your choices. You don't need to earn your rest. You've learned the sacred lesson. You don't owe anyone access to a version of you that no longer exists. That version, the one who said yes out of fear, who tolerated disrespect in the name of being nice, who kept showing up for people who vanished when you needed them, is gone, buried, mourned, honored, and now replaced with something stronger. Not hardened, not bitter, just clear, crystal clear. And that clarity confuses them. They poke at you, testing if the old you will return. They'll bait you with guilt. They'll remind you of your past. They'll tell you you've changed, as if that's something to be ashamed of. But you don't flinch. You don't explain, because you've realized peace doesn't scream. It whispers. It moves in silence, and now you move with it. Let them call you distant. You're just no longer available for dysfunction. Let them call you cold. You're just no longer burning yourself up to keep others warm. Let them call you difficult. You're just finally easy to live with, because you're no longer at war with yourself. And that chosen one is your greatest revolution. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And every time you honor your boundaries, you're claiming that privilege. Every time you walk away from disrespect, you are rewriting your destiny. Every time you choose yourself, you are healing generations of self-betrayal. This is not rebellion, this is restoration. And those who love the version of you that bled for them won't recognize this healed version. Let them go. You're not here to be remembered by the people who benefited from your suffering. You're here to rise, and you are rising. In silence, in strength, in sacred defiance. You've learned that boundaries are not barriers to keep people out, but gates to protect your soul's garden. And when you tend to that garden with respect and care, the weeds of toxic relationships begin to wither. This is the shadow side of love, recognizing that love without boundaries is not love at all, but a wound disguised as connection. Jung taught us that the shadow is the unconscious part of ourselves we refuse to face. It's the parts we hide, deny, or suppress because they feel too dark or shameful. But love without boundaries activates your shadow. It exposes where you have lost yourself in another, where you have sacrificed your wholeness for a flicker of approval or a momentary sense of belonging. This shadow love is addictive because it feels familiar. It's the echo of childhood wounds, where love was conditional, withheld, or used as a bargaining chip. It's the inner voice that says, if I don't do this, I won't be loved. But Jung would say that clinging to that voice keeps you trapped in a cycle of pain, never truly free to love yourself. Setting boundaries awakens your shadow because it forces you to confront the parts of you that feel unworthy, afraid, or guilty for putting yourself first. It challenges the deep programming that taught you to believe love is earned through sacrifice and silence. But here's the paradox. When you finally say no to what harms you, you open a door to a more profound kind of love. Not the one that demands your destruction for its survival, but the one that nurtures your growth without conditions. People will resist this change because it threatens their survival too. The people who depended on your yes to fill their emptiness will push back hard. They will try to shame you into compliance. They will call your boundaries selfish or uncaring. This is the shadow fighting to keep the old order. But Jung believed that the path to individuation, becoming your true self, requires walking through that resistance. It requires courage to stand firm when the world says you're wrong for choosing yourself. It requires faith that your soul's needs are not negotiable. And when you hold that faith, a transformation happens. The love you give becomes a reflection of the love you have for yourself. Your relationships shift from codependence to mutual respect, from exhaustion to energy, from confusion to clarity. This is the sacred alchemy of boundaries. They don't separate you from love. They refine it. They teach you to discern who deserves your presence and who is simply taking up space in your life. They guide you to protect your energy so you can show up fully for those who honor it. And they empower you to let go of attachments that drain rather than uplift. Carl Jung understood that this process is painful because it requires shedding illusions about others and yourself. It means breaking the habit of seeking external validation to feel worthy. It means confronting the loneliness that often accompanies self-discovery. But he also knew this loneliness is a necessary passage, a dark night of the soul before the dawn. It's the silence where your true voice is born, where you learn to love yourself fiercely and without apology. So when they call you difficult for setting boundaries, remember, you are doing the hardest work of all, loving yourself enough to say no to anything that diminishes your light. You are walking the path of the awakened soul, and every step forward is a victory over the shadow that once controlled you. Keep going. Keep protecting your peace. Keep loving yourself fiercely, because the world needs you whole, not broken. It needs your light, not your shadows. And you, chosen one, are exactly what this world has been waiting for.